So today's class wasn't the most uplifting of topics, and that topic being the Crusades. And the history books put the Crusades as 200 years of religious conflict that happened during the Middle Ages. But I want to pose a question to you. Have these sentiments and this anger and this contention really ended in modern times? And I pose that question to you because I want to show you the modern world. Now, this is the world as of now, and green is representative of the Islamic world, and orange is representative of the Christian world. And you can see this dividing line. And this hasn't deviated all that much from the times of the Crusades centuries ago. And here's the question. Will conflict continue between these two sides? Now, this is from social media recently, and somebody's trying to make a point that these very fundamentalist, very radical people, it doesn't matter what side you're on, but it's a problem. And in this photo, it's an American girl holding a very large Bible, an even bigger gun, and a flag. And this woman to the right is holding a Quran, a very big gun, and a flag. So the person on social media's point was, they're cut of the same cloth and they're both problematic. You can take that one or leave that one. I'll leave that to you. But here's the question. Have the Crusades really ended? And the question is why it happened. Now, some people will say it's based on the dogma. And I put some dogma here, some scripture, and some passages from, or a passage from the Quran. And if you read it, you can look at it and say, well, yeah, both sides are saying go get more members. But then again, they have some commonalities. I mean, they all spring from Abraham. They're both monotheistic. They have a very similar view of the afterlife. So I don't know. Maybe it's religion. Maybe it's not religion. I'm not quite sure. Some people say it's a political conflict. It's straight up political, and it may be. The Seljuk Turks were interfering with Christian pilgrimages to the Holy Land, and that made the Christian world a little upset. Also, these Islamic people were defeating the Christian Byzantines in the East, militarily and economically, and the Byzantines said, hey, Western Christian neighbors, we need some help. Let's band together. Maybe it was a political thing. I don't know. I don't know if it was religious or political, maybe both. Some people claim it's an economic conflict, that essentially it was all about that money around the Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean Sea has been lucrative for a very, very long time at this point in history. And you can see in this map, the yellow portion is symbolic of Muslim lands, and the purple is symbolic of Christian lands. And here's the Mediterranean. I don't know, it might be economic. And to get people to fight for an economic gain, religion might not be a bad way to get them to do things. So I don't know, was it religious? Was it political? Was it economic? These are tough questions. Some people will even argue it's caused by European structure. So, for example, in Europe, primogeniture, fancy word, primogeniture, excuse me, is this notion that the firstborn son gets everything. So if you're child 2, 3, 4, I should say male child 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., there's really no hope for you to make it big in Europe by the nature of the system. So by going on the Crusades, it gives you a chance to make a name for yourself, to get some land for yourself. So some will argue it's this European structure that caused it. Also, here's a quote by the Pope. All who die by the way, whether by land or by sea or in battle against the Muslims, shall have immediate forgiveness of the sins. So if you have a religious structure that's saying, hey, take care of business. So some people argue that. So here's the question. Is it this? Is it this? Is it political? Is it religious? Most likely it's a combination of all four. But the question is what combination, what percentage? That's subject to debate, and historians have some pretty hearty debates over that. So here's the basics of the Crusades for our purposes. So who? Who fought in the Crusades? It was fought between the Christian and the Islamic worlds, forces, military forces between those worlds. What? It was a series of conflicts fought to control the Holy Land and surrounding areas. Historians even disagree with how many Crusades there were. I've seen anything between 9 and 11 and 12. Depends on what you consider. So it's a series of conflicts over 200 years, where primarily it was fought in the Middle East. Why? Historians theorize, like I said earlier, religious, political, economic, or structural motives. I personally think it's likely all contributed. How? Through violence, straight up violence, fighting. And when? 1095 to 1291, about 200 years of our history. And it starts with the People's Crusade. Now, the People's Crusade was Pope Urban's speech at the Council of Clermont, where he called for crusade, and it had a major impact on the European public. It was a call to mobilize. It was a call to Christians unite. And this is the starting point. And once the people were united, they engaged in the First Crusade. And it was launched after, this People's Crusade to get people together. And it was, again, Eastern Christians against the Muslims. And it resulted in it created the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And it became, Christians are the new rulers of the Holy Land. So this is the First Crusade. And then for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the second military expedition to the Holy Land was called by the church to capture the county of Edessa that fell to the Muslims in 1144. And again, it goes back and forth. So we have the Second Crusade and the King's Crusade, and it goes back and forth. And then we see the rise of Saladin, the great Muslim military mind, who orchestrated military strategies to fight the Christians. And it goes to a Fourth Crusade, and it goes on and on. And I didn't get into details in the class because I was looking for big, broad themes. Big, broad themes were revenge. Big, broad theme was like a seesaw. It went back and it went forth, and it just went back and forth between Muslim victories, Christian victories. And this is probably the saddest. This is the one that probably grabs the attention the most. The Children's Crusade, right smack dab in the middle of these crusades. So in the early 12th century, several thousand children set out to the Holy Land because the idea was that the knightly army failed to capture Jerusalem, this very, very holy city of Jerusalem, and other holy places due to the impurity, and that children would succeed in their innocence. However, a lot of these kids got sick before they even got there to the ports, and a lot of them were sold into slavery. It was a real, real tragedy of the Crusades. And then we're on to the Fifth Crusade. We're getting into 1221, and it keeps going and going. And again, I didn't get into detail. I don't know if detail has value for the scale we're working on, but theme, Holy Land. The Holy Land was always a focus of the crusade. Sixth Crusade, Seventh Crusade. Oh my gosh, Holy Land. You can even look for Holy Land. It goes on and on. Eighth Crusade. And it keeps going. And then the Ninth Crusade, the last in the series of military expeditions that sought to recapture the Holy Land from the Muslims, was launched by Prince Edward of England, who also took part in the Eighth Crusade. After the French king's death and the departure of the French crusaders, the English prince decided to launch his own expedition. In 1271, he landed in Acre and tried to win support for his cause, but lack of interest and news from England about his father's illness prompted him to return home. With Prince Edward's departure, the attempts of the Christian Europe to capture the Holy Land finally came to an end. So history marks this as the end, but I'm going to make an argument. In recent times, there has been continued contention between the Islamic world and the Christian world, and it goes both ways. I had a very profound moment a few years ago. I had a student talk about the wars America has waged in the Middle East, and many, many Islamic civilians died. And this young man said, "Isn't this a form of terrorism with a different name?" That's a hard question. On the other token, my next door neighbors are Chaldean. These are Christian Iraqis who had to leave their homeland for simply being Christian. And then I've had some people say the travel ban is anti-Islamic. This recent travel ban that won't let certain countries in here is anti-Islamic. And then I heard other people say, well, look at these terrorist groups right now. ISIS, ISIL, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban. This is radical Islam. And this goes back and forth. And, geopolitics is pretty hard to wrap your head around. And it's hard to control. But one thing we can control is the way we treat other people. And it's my hope that we are tools for peace. We're instruments of peace. And it looks more like this scene, that we can accept one another. And although we can't improve things on a worldwide level. We can certainly scale it down to a personal level, a school level, and engage in peaceful, tolerant behaviors. Versus this very recent quote a couple years ago. This is a congressman, and this congressman quoted, "All of Christendom is at war with Islamic horror. For the sake of all that is good and righteous, kill them all." This is not ancient history. This is not centuries ago. This is a congressman, for crying out loud. So the question I leave you with is, regardless of whether you feel the Crusades ended or are still going, try to be a tool for peace and not like this person here whose sentiments sound like 900 years ago, not modern times. So thanks for watching.